In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to be going through Genesis 39 about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. This is going to be a very important chapter for those who struggle with lust and how to deal with temptations, false accusations, imprisonment, and how we can deal with these situations and how God's purposes are still working through even in the midst of injustice. So this is all going to be very important, and we're going to go through this step by step. Okay, verse 1 to 6, let's read. Now Joseph was taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard, an Egyptian, brought him from the Ishmaelites who had brought him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man. He was in the house of his Egyptian master. His master saw that the Lord was with him, and that the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hands. So Joseph found favor in his sight, and attended him. He made him overseer of his house, and put him in charge of all that he had. From the time that he made him overseer in his house, and over all that he had, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house for Joseph's sake. The blessing of the Lord was on all that he had in the house and field, so he left all that he had in Joseph's charge. And with him there he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Okay, so the narrator of this chapter announces straight up front, the Lord was with Joseph and he was a prosperous man. And this entire clause right here, this sentence is going to be a cornerstone for the rest of the chapter. God's blessing is not guaranteed by your status, what you do, but rather by his presence. Remember that Joseph was blessed by God. And remember that Joseph is blessed by God because God is close to the brokenhearted. Very easy to forget what happened in Genesis chapter 37. Joseph was thrown into a pit. He was thrown into a pit. His brothers left him. He was abandoned. At that time, in the pit, he could have said, God is not with me. But yet God works through human wickedness. Even when it seems like all is lost, that we have despair in our world because of the actions of others, the injustice that we see all around us, we see a biblical truth that God can endorse faithful work, right, inside institutions that are otherwise ungodly, through people who are otherwise ungodly. Why? Because all are ungodly. We read this in we're going to read this in Romans chapter 3 verse 10. No one is good, not one. All have fallen short of the glory of God. But God is still willing to bless those who carry out his purpose. Important here as well, we see a biblical cross-reference in Psalm chapter 105, verse 17. So I'll just read this out because it's going to talk about Joseph's little episode here. And it says, he had sent a man ahead of them, Joseph, who had been sold as a slave. So remember, he was sold as a slave, right? His feet were hurt with fetters. His neck was put in a collar of iron until what he said came to pass. The word of the Lord kept testing him. The king sent and released him. The ruler of the people set him free. He made him lord of his house and ruler of all his possessions, to instruct his officials at his pleasure and to teach his elders wisdom. That is to say, God does test those whom he is instituting for his divinely instituted plan. Okay, this is the most important part of the chapter. 6 to 12, and the reason why is because this is how we deal with sexual sin, lust, and temptation. So he left all that he had in Joseph's charge, and with him there he had no concern for anything but the food that he ate. Now Joseph was handsome and good-looking. And after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph, and said, "Lie with me." But he refused, and said to his master's wife, "Look, with me here my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything that he has in my hand. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except yourself, because you are his wife. How then could I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" And although she spoke to Joseph day after day, he would not consent to lie beside her or to be with her. One day, however, when he went into the house to do his work, and while no one else was in the house, she caught hold of his garment, saying, "Lie with me." But he left his garment in her hand and fled and ran outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and fled outside, she called out to the members of her household and said to them, "See, my husband has brought among us a Hebrew to insult us. He came in to lie with me." And I cried out with a loud voice, and when he heard me raise my voice and cry out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside. Then she kept his garment by her until his master came home, and she told him the same story, saying, "The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in to insult me. But as soon as I raised my voice and cried out, he left his garment beside me and fled outside." Okay, what did we just see here? It's incredible. Potiphar's wife tempts Joseph repeatedly with sexual sin, and Joseph refuses bluntly. Theological, clear, no. He says no, and he says so many times, he cites his loyalty to God and to Potiphar, but most importantly to God. He said, "How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" But it's important to recognize something here. This is not merely a prudential, ethical decision, but rather this is a covenantal decision. He has a covenant with God, and sin is a rupture with this covenant. And it's important to recognize here, there's a really big biblical unlock that we can understand here. Joseph says no, and this is the complete opposite, a mirror of the many times that faithful servants of God, even those who were instituted by God, said yes in the Bible. And it tells you something about the type of resistance, godly resistance, that a faithful servant of God must have. This is not merely self-control, right? Because anyone can be disciplined, even an atheist can be disciplined. But here we're seeing something a little bit more specific than that. There is a covenant with God. He thinks about God in every single aspect of his life, and he echoes Christ. Remember how Christ, right, in Matthew chapter 4, was tempted by Satan, and he said no each and every time. But it's interesting, the way he says no, he always takes and uses the Bible. He uses scripture to defeat temptation. That's what he says. Satan tempts Jesus whilst he's in the desert. He's hungry. Satan tempts him with food. When you're lonely, Satan tempts you with lust. When you're angry, when you're sad, depressed, lonely, Satan tempts you with the thing that you're most likely to succumb to in that particular moment. And this is what we need to recognize. Think about what Joseph is doing. Does Joseph have a wife? No, he's all alone. Is Joseph lonely? Yes, of course he's lonely. But yet he still refuses. Why? Why does he refuse? Something that is really important to recognize is because he remembered his identity. What was his identity? His identity is a steward and servant of the Lord, and he doesn't want to go against that. However, many of us, and it's really important, many of us think to ourselves, it's only when we press on the no-no websites, it's only when we give into the temptations, it's only when we do the sin, then we're truly evil. At that very moment we are evil. But what we fail to understand is we were evil to begin with. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5, for every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually. Romans chapter 5 verse 12, for sin entered the world by one man. All were made unrighteous by one man. Romans chapter 3 verse 10, no one is good, not one. Isaiah, we see, your righteousness is like filthy rags. The point is, you forget who you were, and you don't know who you are. That is why you give into your temptations. You forget who you were. Who you are is a child of God who is made righteous by the blood of the Lamb. Who you were was an evil, rotten sinner who could not do anything apart from the wickedness of this world. You were controlled by the ruler of this world, and that's why you did what you did. And you have to remember, and if we fail to remember this key part of our identity, then we will never overcome sin. That's just the way it goes. For me, if you're asking me personally how I was able to at least try to overcome temptations and lust and these sins that deal with us, the first thing I did is I made myself as busy as I possibly could. So this is a practical thing. I made myself extremely busy. As many subjects as possible. I was doing as many extracurricular activities as possible. I'm doing this podcast as well. I make sure that my life is as busy as possible because I don't have the time to do it. That's the first thing, a very practical step you can do. And this is biblical as well. When Adam was doing work in the garden, do you think he was giving into his sin, his temptation? No. Even here, Jacob was assigned a lot of work to do, right? A lot of tasks he was given by Potiphar because God blessed him and had providence with him because he was a part of that covenant line. So my advice to you would be to try and make yourself as busy as possible. And the second thing is, it's a mentality shift. You need a complete mentality shift. And that mentality shift is the following. You need to stop thinking that you are good and realize who you are without Christ. When you do that, you start to realize, hang on a minute, because I know this for a fact. It's been like more than 3 months since I last watched any lustful thing or gave into some temptation like this. But I can assure you, I don't feel better now. In fact, I'm more concerned with the fact of how evil I am. Because I always thought that when I would give up these temptations, when I would give up sexual sin, when you give up lust, when you give up these desires, you feel as though you'll be good now. You won't have to deal with these temptations. You'll finally be perfect. This is the only thing you deal with. You struggled all this while and now you're going to be free of that. But that's not the way it goes. Whilst Christ does say that those who sin are a slave to sin, and that's true, but that's just one sin. There are so many other different types of sins that you have to deal with. And another thing is, just because you give into sin, if God hated the fact that you gave into sin, why wouldn't he just take it away from you just like that? There's a reason why he allows you to deal with these temptations, is so that you remember to be humble. Imagine if the moment you became a Christian, all of your problems immediately just went away. You'll deal with an even worse problem, and that problem is pride. So the reason why sometimes you have to struggle with sin is so that you remain humble, so that you keep coming back to God. Otherwise you'll be evil beyond all measure. And once you begin to learn, oh wait, I'm actually evil even before I went onto the browser. I'm evil with every single thought I think. I'm evil with every single inclination of the thoughts of my heart. Then you start to realize, hang on, I'm not doing this to be good because I cannot be good. You should stop trying to think that you can do everything on your own, and you need to, like I said, pretend you're lying on the operating table and say, Lord, I'm going to let you do everything because I know I've tried it my way and I can't do this. I'm going to replace my thoughts with your thoughts. And where can you find his thoughts? In the Word. And this is exactly what we're doing right now. I hope that helps as well. Make yourself as busy as possible, and you need to change your mindset by remembering who you are. Don't try and think you can be good. Because the moment you try and think, I'm not going to try and sin, I'm not going to try and sin, I'm not going to try and sin, that's the only thing that's in your mind. Sin, 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 sin. I was watching an episode of, I think it was Kitchen Nightmares, or it was a show, Hell's Kitchen, by Gordon Ramsay. And he was giving advice to one of the teams, and he was saying, don't tell yourself, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up. He was giving advice to the chefs, right? He was saying, because when you say, don't mess up, don't mess up, don't mess up, the only thing that's in your head is mess up, mess up, mess up, mess up, mess up. And guess what happens? You mess up because that's all you're thinking about. Instead, what you should be saying is, I'm going to try and do as best as possible. That sort of thing. It's a little bit of a mentality shift. With God, it's like, I'm going to leave everything in your hands. Surrender everything to God. And you may be like, well, how do I surrender? That's how you surrender. Just say, I don't know how to do this. I'm going to rely on you. I don't know where this is going to go, but I'm going to rely on you. And watch wonders happen in your life. But be very careful. Don't do it for the wonders. Do it for relationship. You want to be with God, to know Him, and to love Him. And that's important. Okay, I'm going to finish the rest of this chapter. Hopefully you heard of some stuff. 19, verse 19 onwards. When his master heard the words that his wife spoke to him, saying, "This is the way your servant treated me," he became enraged. So Potiphar has become enraged with Joseph, and Joseph's master took him and put him into prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. He remained there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love. He gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer, and the chief jailer committed to Joseph's care all the prisoners who were in the prison, and whatever was done there, he was the one who did it. The chief jailer paid no heed to anything that was in Joseph's care, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it prosper. I just want to point out something here, which is going to be important. The Lord makes things prosper. So again, you have to always bring it back to the Lord. But something I also wanted to illustrate, because it's important nonetheless, is that Joseph can actually be thought of as the proto-Jesus. Proto-Jesus? What do I mean? What I mean is, Joseph resists sexual temptation, the same way Jesus resisted the tempter. Joseph was falsely accused by Potiphar. He suffers imprisonment and exile, and is later exalted to preserve many lives. Is that not identical? Is that not so similar to Jesus, who is resisted by the tempter? He was falsely accused, he suffered and died on a cross, and was later exalted to save many lives. Jesus' arrest, crucifixion, resurrection. Pit, prison, palace, provision. That is the way it goes. From the pit to the prison to the palace, to provide for everyone. And this is a compressed, right? But it's a compressed allegory and foreshadowing of the gospel. That is, humiliation precedes exaltation, right? And this is a Bible's recurrent way of saying, hey, blessed are you when people revile you. Blessed when they utter falsities against your name, for you will be blessed. And this is something we need to remember, that we're not going to give in to sin's short-term success, but rather we're going to rely on God's providence, that even when we are in the worst of situations, we can rely on God to get us through it. So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.